October 13th, 54 AD. The marble columns of Claudius's dining chamber gleamed in the candlelight as servants arranged silver platters across the table. The emperor's fingers drummed against his ivory chair. His wife Agrippina glided into the room, her silk stola whispering across the floor, carrying a covered dish herself, an unusual gesture that made Claudius's jaw tighten. She lifted the lid. Mushrooms, glistening with oil and herbs, the emperor's favourite delicacy. Claudius reached for his cup, then stopped, his gaze locked onto Agrippina's face, those dark eyes that never quite met his anymore. The silence stretched until even the slaves froze mid-pour. Finally, Claudius pierced a mushroom with his fork, watching her smile widen with each movement toward his mouth. The first bite released earthy flavors across his tongue, then the second. By the third, sweat beaded along his temples despite the October chill. His throat constricted, not from poison, but from the weight of every meal becoming a wager against death. In Rome's palace, even the simplest dinner transformed into a game where the stakes were measured in heartbeats, not coins. The emperor's suspicion crystallized into ritual. Every morning, Halotus stood beside the imperial table, his Greek features betraying the tremor that rippled through his jaw. The silver platters arrived in procession, roasted peacock glazed with garum, honeyed dormice, steaming mulsum wine. Each dish demanded its sacrifice. The slaves' fingers, once steady enough to transcribe senatorial decrees, now shook as they lifted the ceremonial spoon. The tasting followed precise choreography. First, Halotus pressed the food against his lips, waiting for any burning sensation. Then, a small portion on the tongue rolled carefully to detect bitter almonds or metallic traces. Finally, the swallow, that moment when his throat constricted around potential death. Claudius watched, his milky eyes tracking every grimace, every involuntary twitch. The emperor counted silently. 20 heartbeats, 50. Only after 200 did he reach for his own fork. The weight of survival pressed against Halotus's chest with each meal. His stomach, once accustomed to barley gruel, now churned with exotic sauces that might conceal hemlock or wolfsbane. Servants whispered that the previous taster had lasted 43 days before collapsing mid-bite, foam bubbling between his teeth. Halotus marked each sunrise on the wall beside his pallet, knowing that in this marble palace, loyalty meant nothing. Only his functioning liver kept him alive. Beyond Rome's crumbling borders in Constantinople's marble halls, imperial tasters inherited the same deadly tradition. Here, beneath golden mosaics depicting Christ, Pantocrator, a man named Theodore, raises a jeweled goblet to his lips. The wine touches his tongue first. Sweet Byzantine vintage laced with honey and spices, his throat constricts, not from poison, but from the 100 courtiers watching his Adam's apple bob with each swallow. The Emperor Constantine VII sits motionless on his ivory throne, counting silently. 1 breath, 2, 3. Theodore's pupils dilate, normal reaction to the dimmed light filtering through silk curtains or the first sign of wolfsbane. The taster's fingers grip the goblet's stem. Any tremor, any hesitation, and the palace guards will drag him to the dungeons beneath the hippodrome. There, other tasters have vanished after suspicious stomach cramps. A bead of moisture traces Theodore's jawline. The Byzantine court transformed every imperial banquet into theatre. Silk-draped tables groaning with peacock tongues and garum-soaked delicacies, while death lurked in gilded dishes. The emperor's own mother had dissolved arsenic in rose water. His uncle collapsed mid-feast, blood frothing between his teeth. Theodore sets down the empty goblet, his hand steady. The emperor nods. Another course arrives. While emperors trembled before their feasts and tasters gambled with death at every meal, the true architects of this terror operated in shadows. Deep beneath Rome's marble facades, in a workshop thick with the scent of crushed oleander and nightshade, Locusta bent over her mortar and pestle. The empire's most notorious poisoner ground bitter almonds into powder, each stroke releasing the distinctive aroma that masked death itself. Her fingers, stained permanently yellow from handling toxic compounds, dripped 3 drops of a colourless liquid into a bowl of honey. The mixture barely rippled. No taste, no smell beyond the almonds. This concoction would pass any taster's scrutiny. The poison worked slowly. First a gentle warmth spreading through the chest, then tremors in the hands. By the time the victim's throat began to close, hours later, the taster would be long dismissed. Locusta had perfected this particular recipe through practice on condemned prisoners, noting how their eyes bulged, how their skin mottled purple, how they clawed at their throats for air that wouldn't come. The Emperor Nero himself commissioned her services, watching her demonstrations with fascination. She poured the poisoned honey into a crystal vial, sealing the fate of whoever would taste it. A death that would unfold over days, not moments. The poison's absence proved far more dangerous than its presence. In the Ottoman palace of Sultan Murad IV, a simple meal of lamb and rice had transformed into writhing agony. The Sultan's fingers clawed at his abdomen as bile rose in his throat. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, fixed on the trembling figure beside the golden serving tray. Ahmed, the taster, stood frozen, silk tunic darkening with perspiration. He had sampled every morsel 30 minutes prior. The protocol demanded it. Yet now, palace guards seized his wrists, iron shackles replacing his silver serving spoons. The Sultan's physician wouldn't arrive for hours. By then, Ahmed's fate was sealed. Murad needed someone to blame. The dungeon stairs descended into Ottoman justice. No trial awaited. No investigation into spoiled meat or the Sultan's notorious appetite for fermented mare's milk. Ahmed's predecessor had lasted 3 months before a similar accusation. The torturer's tools gleamed in the torchlight below. Above, Murad's stomach cramps were already subsiding, but the machinery of punishment ground forward. The papal palace in Rome hummed with celebration on August the 5th, 1503, as Pope Alexander VI raised his goblet to Cardinal Adriano Castellesi. 3 tasters had already sampled the wine, their throats working methodically as they swallowed the ruby liquid. The Pope drained his cup, confident in his human shield's protection. Within hours, Alexander's skin erupted in black pustules. His tongue swelled until it protruded between his lips like a grotesque purple slug. The tasters remained perfectly healthy, watching as their master convulsed on silk sheets soaked with bile. Someone had bypassed the entire tasting ceremony, perhaps poisoning the Pope's personal flask after the ritual sampling. For 7 days, Alexander's body refused to die. His flesh turned the colour of mulberries, decomposing while he still drew breath. The papal physicians fled the stench of rotting meat that emanated from his living corpse. When death finally claimed him, his bloated remains had to be literally hammered into the coffin. The same hands that had protected Catherine de' Medici's life for 7 years now trembled as they emptied the paper packet into Count Montmorency's stew. Jean-Baptiste Roussel, the Queen Mother's most trusted taster, watched the white powder dissolve into the thick broth, his fingers clutching the promised gold florins hidden beneath his velvet sleeve. The transformation from shield to sword required meticulous planning. Roussel memorized the kitchen rotations, befriended the sauce makers, learned which servants carried which dishes. When Montmorency's personal cook fell mysteriously ill, Roussel volunteered to prepare the Count's evening meal himself, a gesture of loyalty that raised no suspicion from a man who'd risked death daily. The arsenical powder vanished completely into the rich gravy, leaving no trace of bitterness or discoloration. Roussel carried the bowl through the torch-lit corridors of the Louvre, past guards who nodded respectfully at the Queen's protector. Behind him, Catherine de' Medici's spies already prepared false witnesses who would swear they'd seen Montmorency's own physician near the kitchens that night. The same silk-robed figure who had pressed gold into a taster's palm now watched from a palace window as guards seized his accomplice in the courtyard below. Marco Benedetti, once trusted with the Duke of Ferrara's life, thrashed against iron shackles while soldiers dragged him toward the gates. The morning sun illuminated fresh bruises blooming across his face, evidence of the interrogation that had shattered his resolve. In the piazza, carpenters hammered together a scaffold while the executioner sharpened his blade against a whetstone. Benedetti's confession had been extracted with hot pincers and thumbscrews until he named 3 conspirators and the poison, wolfsbane mixed with powdered glass. The crowd pressed forward as guards forced him to his knees, prying open his jaw while the executioner's assistant gripped a pair of iron tongs. Blood cascaded down Benedetti's chin as his severed tongue dropped onto the cobblestones, his screams reduced to wet, gurgling sounds. The executioner positioned the noose while a herald proclaimed his crimes: betrayal of sacred duty, attempted regicide, accepting 30 ducats to murder his master. His body convulsed for 6 minutes before stillness claimed him, left hanging until sunset as ravens circled overhead. The dungeon door slammed shut on another condemned taster, but Marcus Aurelius's former food guardian still drew breath in a villa outside Rome 30 years after his service ended. His fingers curled like dried vines around a cup of watered wine, each joint swollen twice its natural size. The physicians called it bone rot. Marcus knew better. Every morning brought fresh agony, his liver hardened beneath yellowing skin, his breath rattling through scarred lungs. Lead sweetened the emperor's wine for decades. Mercury preserved his figs. Arsenic dusted the peacock tongues like finest salt. Each toxin accumulated drop by drop, grain by grain, until his organs resembled those of men dead 3 days. The imperial pension kept him alive but not living. His teeth blackened and fell like autumn leaves. Blood seeped from his gums whenever he attempted solid food. The other tasters, those who survived their first year, never lasted past 50. Marcus watched them die one by one, kidney stones, madness, paralysis creeping up from their feet. The old taster's body never made it to consecrated ground. By 1789, the marble halls of Versailles echoed with different screams, revolutionary cries drowning out the delicate clink of poisoned chalices. The guillotine blade fell faster than any toxin could work. Royal physicians abandoned their silver needles and bezoar stones, fleeing as aristocratic blood pooled in the cobblestones. Empty tasting chambers collected dust across Europe's palaces. The Romanovs' golden spoons tarnished untouched in St. Petersburg drawers. Habsburg dining protocols crumbled into yellowed parchment. Chemical tests replaced trembling lips. A drop of liquid turning blue meant arsenic, not a servant convulsing on Persian rugs. Progress murdered an ancient profession more efficiently than any poison. Yet servants still hesitated before polishing the crystal decanters. Footmen's hands trembled carrying platters through corridors where tasters once collapsed. The Savoy's head chef kept a locked cabinet of antidotes until 1897. Even electricity illuminating dining rooms couldn't banish shadows where men had writhed and died, their sacrifice etched into every gilded fork.